Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Welcome to our program today. This is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Also, I'd like to thank the Museum of Archaeology and Biblical History here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for loaning us these artifacts that we're using throughout our podcast. Today, my guest host, and of course, I shouldn't say special guest anymore, David. Guest host.
Pretty regular.
Or just plain host, is Dr. David Graves. He received his PhD from Aberdeen University. And Dr. Graves today has provided with a PowerPoint, and he's going to lecture on a couple that is very popular in archaeology, probably one of the first uses of I'm going to say academic archaeology. Before that is largely a treasure hunt or an exploration, kind of like an Indiana Jones movie.
Some might say looting.
Yeah, I was kind of avoid
You're being kind.
I'm kind of avoid that because, I do work with museums and they get angry when you use looting as a word.
Yeah, well, in those early years, pretty fair description, but it has changed, and certainly Petrie has contributed to that.
Okay, you gave away the name. So, Dr. Graves, go ahead. It's your baby at this point.
All right. Well, I don't like calling it a lecture. I like to say we're going to tell a few stories, maybe. And
well, you know what? That's a good point. When I said lecture, I thought, I just went kind of boring academic on that one.
Yeah, we're going to try and keep it light and interesting and fun. So we're not in a classroom, but I do have PowerPoints and some photographs. I've colorized them. So I'll share my screen and we'll get started here. We're doing a little bit of a mini-series, some major discoveries digging together, and this one's going to be part 3, and a lot of materials taken from my book on the history of biblical archaeology, lots of great stories from archaeologists from the past. So today we're going to talk about Sir Flinders Petrie. So who was this character? He was colorful. This is what he looked like in the 1930s, so he's been around for a while, born in 1853 and died in 1942. He's a British Egyptologist and a biblical archaeologist. And he's known as the father of Palestinian archaeology and also the father of modern Egyptology. So this character is pretty important. William F. Albright said, the greatest genius among biblical archaeologists. That's a pretty high standard. So he respected him, held him high in esteem. What's interesting is the guy never went to school.
Don't say that in front of kids.
Yeah, self-taught genius. He had asthma, chronic asthma, and could never attend, of course, in those days. A lot of these buildings had a lot of mold and stuff in them, and the weather in England, it's not the best, so he couldn't go. So he was self-educated. He developed an early interest in archaeology, and at the age of 8, can you think of this, 8 years old, he proposed digging theory, pare away earth inch by inch. So going down little by little, taking the top off, and he had this idea, this is how it should be done, instead of going in, because up until that point, a lot of them were going in and just digging trenches, great big swaths across the tell, and he just said, no, we should go down inch by inch. So he was influenced by General Augustus Pitt Rivers. Some may not know or have heard of Pitt Rivers before, but Pitt Rivers had this idea and this notion of going down chronologically in a stratigraphy. We'll talk about that in a moment. But so he got a lot of his information and some of his ideas from Pitt Rivers. Here they are in their younger years. His wife's name was Hilda. It's interesting that my mom's name was Hilda. So I've got kind of a fond connection to Sir Flinders and his wife. Hilda Dimmick was my mom, and Hilda Mary Isabel Petrie. Now her maiden name, or Nee, was Yerlin, and she was born in Ireland, 1871, and died in 1957.
Wow.
I was born in 56.
You're old.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting up there in age. They were married in November 26, 1896 in London. They had a lot in common, and Hilda's role was both spouse and collaborator in archaeology. There's limited public details really on her early education, but she developed skills in drawing and organization. And that, of course, is key for an archaeological work, so she was invaluable. Remember that when we were talking about Agatha Christie that one of her skills was photography. Well, Hilda's skill was drawing and organizing, and also fundraising. She was active in Egyptology and archaeology along with her husband. Here they are. He was a bit older than her. She joined Petrie on many of his excavations and very integral to the success of his field work. It takes a team. She records the finds and she creates the detailed drawings. Many of them that we have today were actually drawn by her. And she managed the logistics and making sure they had vehicles to drive and overseeing the workers, make sure they got paid. And she handled the fundraising for the British School of Archaeology in Egypt as well. Here's a nice shot of a few of the folks. And these were, in 1930, the members of the Palestinian Exploration Fund that were sent out to do a variety of different excavation works. Gerald Harding, and then Hilda, and then Sir Flinders, and then Olga Tufnell. She was a famous archaeologist that I've got a section in my book on her, as well as James Starkey, and then Risden. He's not as well known. Flinders said about his wife, "It was actually entirely due to my wife that the resources of the British school were raised. Much of the facsimile drawings and plans were hers." She played a key role as his wife and partner in the excavations. This is a picture of the truck from 1934 that they explored Egypt together, Syria in 1936. So some of the places that they excavated were in Egypt, in Abydos, Sarabet el Kadim, and then they went to Palestine. The later years she lived with Petrie in Jerusalem, based at the British School of Archaeology. And so this is what the British School of Archaeology looks like. It's now called the Kenyon Institute, and I've stayed there. We stayed there, I think it was 2019 maybe, to go back in my records. And anyway, she continued supporting the archaeological work after Petrie died in 1942, published his works and preserved Petrie's archaeological records. So she was an important figure in early Egyptology and in biblical archaeology. This is the sign that's on the door. These it almost looks like Portuguese. They call it alluja. It's blue and white tiles where they have the name Council for British Research in the Levant. I've actually published a peer-reviewed article in their journal called The Levant. That's why we were actually staying there. But we got kicked out on Christmas Day. That's a story for another time. How I got kicked out of this place. Had to do with politics, nothing personal. Oh, there's the sign right there on the outside of the building. That's the front door as you go into it. They have a little bit of in the vestibule, they have a little niche where they have a picture of Kathleen Kenyon and some of the artifacts and items from Kathleen Kenyon. And there's the CBRL, the Levant Journal, on display. Yeah, it was 2009. I stayed here with our team. They had facilities. It's like an apartment complex where you can stay. So Dr. Stripling and I stayed there. But that's where she did a lot of her work in their later years. That was in Jerusalem. Now, why is he so important? Well, because he was a pioneer of the scientific method of archaeology and really revolutionized what we do today, introducing the systematic recording of all the finds, first to confirm the artifact substance, metal by metallurgists, plants by botanists. And so he brought specialists in and started to break archaeology up into different areas. And as I said, he developed stratigraphy and what we now know as sequential dating or sequence dating. SD is the short abbreviations for it. So it's a mound. Here's a mound. And then you have different layers. This is the eastern face of Tel Hesse that he excavated. Prompt publication of his finds. A lot of people today don't publish what they've excavated very, very fast. They sit around and collect dust for many, many years. They like digging, but they don't like writing. Yeah, but he did 100 books and about 1,000 articles, so he was very prolific. This is a cutaway of a tell and what it looks like. I've sort of made a reproduction of that other black and white image. So you have the bedrock down here. So that's your earliest period. So it could be Neolithic or Chalcolithic. And then you have early bronze. And then you might have a debris fill here. and then you have Middle Bronze. On our site at Tel El Hammam, there was no Late Bronze right here, so that was kind of telling, pardon the pun. Sometimes you would dig a deep probe into it, so you go down through various different periods to try and see what period you had. You might have a city wall that goes down deep, down into maybe the Middle Bronze, and then sticks up out of the ground. You might have a modern pit dug down into several periods, so Byzantine, Roman, and Hellenistic. And then you might have a cistern built for water, and that goes down into a couple different periods. So you have to know which period you're digging in. And then you have some modern topsoil over the top of it all, with maybe some ancient ruins or even some modern, semi-modern ruins sticking out of the ground. So that's how you have a mound sort of set up. You need to understand this as you dig down through the various different periods and levels. He did some groundbreaking work in Egypt. This is where he started to work at first. And he accurately measured the Great Pyramid of Giza in 1880. There's a fun story about it. He disguised himself as a mad woman to access the pyramids. George, you used the word tutu, but I just say a mad woman because anybody that was dressed in a tutu was kind of considered as being mad, and that's how he was able to keep away the locals so he could do his work.
Yeah, well, today they call it going woke. He's part of the woke.
True, true. That's right. There's actually a pretty interesting story about a friend of mine, Dr. Lane Rittmeyer. He was trying to get measurements. And I know this story because Dr. Rittmeyer dug with us at Shiloh and at Tel El Hammam together. And I chauffeured him around a little bit, he and his wife, Kathleen. And he lived in Jerusalem for a while, and he was trying to get the measurements of the Temple Mount. And he was trying to get the measurements of the Alaska Mosque that sits on the Temple Mount for his research. And he told the story that the only way he could get it was he took his whole family in one day, and they sat on along one of the benches, and they took their measuring tape and they put it underneath their legs, and they stretched it all across in order to get the measurements for the Temple Mount area. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So sometimes you got to do some extreme things in order to get your measurements. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting story about taking measurements from a friend of mine, Dr. Lane Rittmeyer. He's an archaeological architect and probably the leading world expert on the Temple Mount. And now you know how he got some of his measurements, because it was illegal to be able to go up there and do the kind of research that he was, being under the control of the Arabs. So back to Petrie. He worked with the Egyptian Exploration Society, the British School of Egyptian Archaeology, and these are some of the places that he excavated. I'll show a few pictures of these sites, but they were all in Egypt except for Tel El Hessi, which was in Palestine, or what we know as Israel today. And really there was no serious excavation per se until Tel El Hessi in 1890. So here we have Necrotis. This is an interesting site because it's the first permanent Greek settlement in Egypt. So we find some Greek pottery, Temple of Apollo there, some hybrid artifacts in the city layout. Here are the local workers taking their baskets up. I colorized this black and white photo that was taken from that early period. That's how they did archaeology back in those days. And it was, I say, excavated. It was explored in this way from 1884 to 1886. Here are a few of the artifacts that have Greek influence, these Greek items. And then he went on to work at Kahun as well as Grob Hawara. Say that
I thought
one.
that said Hawaii.
Yeah, it looks like it. And you see how it's by Sir Flinders Petrie here. In one of my libraries overseas, I have some of his books. So there's a lot of everyday artifacts from this site that they got in papyrus with administrative and medical texts on them. And then we go to Palestine, Tel Hessi in 1890. Now, what's interesting about this site is that he was able to identify similar looking pottery from what he had found and discovered in Egypt. Now, in Egypt, they had the advantage of being able to do fairly accurate dating, sequential dating from the scarabs. So they had the name of the pharaoh, they knew when the pharaohs lived, and then they could correlate that period in Egyptian history to the pottery, so they could date the pottery. So now he goes to Tel Hessi, and he's able to see similar type pottery. Now he can put a date on the pottery in Palestine in the site that he's excavating in Israel. So this was really the first scientific excavation in the Holy Land. In harsh conditions with scorpions and polluted water, robberies. Locals would would show up and rob them of their finds. We stayed in nice fancy hotels, and we were at the Movenpick. They have reverse osmosis purification of water, so you could drink the water out of the tap. Not everybody did, but I did, and I had no stomach issues for the 15 seasons or years I was over there. Did run into a lot of scorpions and some snakes. So pretty harsh conditions. They're living in tents. But they uncovered some Philistine culture and some pottery, coins, and jewelry. We talked about the Philistines last week's podcast. And they used this stratigraphic technique to establish the historical context. Remember, we have a mound, and then you go down through the different periods. This is probably a trench that they dug through here, cut like a piece of, cut into a piece of cake. You put a slice into it, and then you can read all the different layers. Now, how much cream there is, how much raspberry filling, when you cut into a cake, they do the same kind of thing. He published his finds in the reconstruction of ancient Jerusalem in 1892. There's another picture of the mound. See, they're driving up to the top, the summit of it, like we do in our. Here's a blow up of the first map ever made showing the superimposed ancient city buried in a tell. And then he connected the pottery from the strata of the tell, and then he was able to date it to the different periods. He dug at Amarna, and the famous discovery of the Tel El Amarna letters. This is one of the tablets here. The great temple of Aten, the royal palace, and then, of course, the contextualized location of the Amarna letters. Many of them are in museums around the world. And he did that from 1891 to 1892. Here's some of the photo I took of some of them at the British Museum, 5 of them. They mentioned the name Habiru, or Apibru, the disturbers of the peace. So these are the 5 of the 382 tablets describing the diplomatic relations between the rulers of Egypt and her neighbors, such as the Shechem and Jerusalem and Byblos. So they're a big deal. We learn a lot about the history of the time period from these tablets. And then we go off to Abydos. And here's the facade of the temple of Seti I in Abydos, Egypt. Pretty big structure. A lot of it has been reconstructed here, the parts at the top. And then we have a panel here from the Osiris temple, Horus presenting some royal regalia to the worshipped Seti I. So they found a lot of really neat stuff. And this would date to about 1300 BC, roughly, Abydos. And then he goes on to Nagada. Here's some pottery from the graves at Nagada that you can see today, even up on the surfaces. Some of these vessels. They have we call this a rope pattern on some of the sides. 1894 to 1895. And then he went on to Fayum. Here are a couple of the paintings. This is from the later the Roman-ish period. This is from the Pushkin Museum in Moscow when I was there. I was able to get a few of these paintings, photos of them. These are on the coffins, the wood. We've talked about the mummy masks in a previous podcast, so you can check that out. 1894 to 1895. So here's some of the pottery that he laid out, and he has it all numbered and putting the similar patterns together, and then he was able to do the dating on everything. So he developed this pottery cyration to establish the relative chronology or the sequence dating. The top strata, the recent, or the lower is the older. Correlates the Egyptian pottery, as I said, with the Greek sites. And actually that helped Heinrich Schliemann. He dug at using the Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, discovered the ancient city of Troy using this mythical text. So if he can use it to find a mythical text, why can't we use the Bible to find it, even if we consider it to be a mythical text? I don't believe it is, but if Schliemann can use a mythical text, why can't we use the geography of the ancient texts to find these ancient sites? So as we talk about ceramic typology, here we have these storage jars. And you can see I put the dates on them. This is from the TSU Museum display, photo I took when I was there. And you can see the Chalcolithic style with the rope handles. You have the late bronze, a little larger handles. Iron Age 1, these are horizontal handles on the early bronze. Late bronze, they have more like what we call maybe a monkey ear handle. Iron Age 2A, more of a rounded bottom. They go from this sharp pointed edge. Middle bronze, these 4 handles, and Iron Age 2C. So you can see the development of how these change. We can do the same thing with oil lamps, and we're going to talk maybe a little bit more about the oil lamps a bit later. So this is Iron Age style shell.
Right. So don't lose that slide there.
No, I'll bring her back. This is the Bronze Age into the Iron Age. But what's interesting about this one is it is also, it reappears in the Hasmonean period much later. It's a little bit like the Amish. They want to bring back the old style of what Grandpa did years and years ago because they don't like this new modern stuff. So you've got to be careful when you're digging and you find this, because are you in an Iron Age layer or are you in a Hasmonean layer? And it can fool you. So you have to know those kinds of things. This is Herodian, time of Herod the Great. This is late Roman. This is Byzantine, and this is Islamic. You can sort of see the progression here from the styles of the oil lamps. I'll show a few of these we have in our collections. And there's one of those Iron Age 2A storage jars that I was excavating down in our square and uncovered. And I think, George, you excavated with me in a square not far from this one. It wasn't this one, but it was not far from it.
Yeah, it'd been cool find. That would have been a fun. Would you trust me to dig that out there for you?
Well, we take the dirt down like you do water in a bathtub.
Yeah, I know.
And the tricky part about this one is that we had uncovered it in the last few hours of the day, and if we didn't get it out, well, when we go back in the morning, it wouldn't be there.
Yeah, if you don't get it, then somebody else would.
Yeah, local teenage boys would come through. They'd extricate it from its location. They call them the night diggers. So yeah, we had to go work really quick and fast and take the dirt down very quick. And that was quite a size, so it took us a while. And we had to preserve what was inside of it in case there was anything that we could do carbon dating on. Well, this was discovered at Thebes, the Merneptah stele, one of the earliest mentions of Israel. There is another inscription that may be earlier than that, but the text says Israel is laid to waste, his seed is no longer. And it puts some syncretism between biblical record and archaeology. So that's why it's so important. And as I said, there's the Berlin stele pedestal relief that could be earlier. So scholars are talking about that. Here we have a map that helps us a little bit with Thebes down here and Karnak Temple down here. Abydos is here. There's the Valley of the Kings. Tel Amarna is here. That gives you a little idea of the geography. And there's another spot up here that he dug at. Sirabit el Qadim inscription, discovered in 1904, 1905, with a proto-alphabetic discovery. And this is down here on the other side, the Sinai Peninsula, Sirabit el Qadim. Canaanite prisoners from Canaan, prisoners of war mining turquoise down here in the mines. And they've got some writing down here, one of the earliest alphabetic inscriptions. So it's pretty important. It's now on display at the Petrie Museum. And here's a few other places that he excavated at, uncovering remains from the Chalcolithic to the Hellenistic periods. And then he continued to do his writings. He was criticized by Mortimer Wheeler for lax supervision of his workmen. There's always critics around. We even have a few on our website or our podcast. Sometimes they criticize us for being AI generated, and we're not. They criticize it for misdating the strata by up to 1,000 years and later years. So he had his critiques and his criticisms. It wasn't perfect, but again, this is the early developments of archaeology. He was controversial for his eugenics theories linked to strata changes, so criticized him about that. So he's buried in the Protestant cemetery in Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and here's his grave. He was knighted in 1923, so carries the prefix of Sir Flinders Petrie, the father of Egyptology and the father of modern archaeology. Professor of Egyptology at the University of College in London from 1892 to 1933 up until his death. And he influenced many, many archaeologists like Reisner and Fisher and William F. Albright. So really an important figure. And of course, what's also important to mention here is how influential and important his wife was beside his side his entire life. Petrie says, everything is a document to the archaeologists. That's a pretty important quote. I used to say on our site to our folks, every period is important. That's my quote. But Petrie said, everything is a document to the archaeologists. And that's why every period is important. He worked into his 80s, living frugally in Jerusalem. Stories are that he actually lived in a cave. I'm not sure he was there with his wife, but he lived in a cave for a while at one of the sites. He died in 1942, buried in the Protestant cemetery, as I said, in Mount Zion. But his head was sent to the Royal College of Surgeons for study. So his head is here, but his body is actually in Jerusalem. Oh, there's that jar again, close up of it. There's some more pottery here. There was, and some more here. This was the only piece of pottery that was entirely in one piece. There was 6 others around the circumference of the room. So what it appears to have happened is that the roof or the ceiling had fallen in, and it had fallen inwards and then broke all the pottery around the exterior, but preserved this one here in the middle of the room.
And you dated that to Middle Bronze Age?
No, this is Iron Age 2A.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Iron Age 2A. That gives you an idea of its size. This was my partner. He was in the square beside us. And so it was a combined effort, team effort.
No, I'm going to go off subject. Is that Carol Cobb's daughter? And that's Carol's hand with the spoon in it? Is that Carol?
This is Carol Cobb's daughter.
Yeah.
She dug with me in my square. This is not Carol. This was one of our other workers.
Okay.
Carol was down working in another spot, but yeah, she dug with us.
Dr. Cobbs will be with us in an oncoming podcast, just to let people know.
Yeah, her mom dug with us. She was the assistant director of the dig for many years, so 15 seasons, and her name is Allie Cobbs. She dug with us, and Carl. Carl was holding this jar. He was a retired airline pilot for one of the major airline companies. And Carol Cobbs retired from being a stewardess in the airline industry. And then she went on to get her PhD in archaeology. And she also worked up another site, Makkah, up north in Galilee. This is in Jordan. And this is actually Abu Ahmed's son. He was the owner of this tell. His father owned the tell, and Abdul Rahman, he dug with us. He was one of my right-hand diggers. He was a young boy when he started, but he grew up pretty fast. And here I am holding it, and you can see it 2A here, same style, handles and rim, and this round bulb shape. Call it a bag-shaped storage jar. This is before I had my beard. I was a youngin' back in those days, and I had the privilege of carrying it back on the bus to the hotel in my lap because we didn't want to put it under the bus. So that was a pretty big find. Okay, so that's my podcast for Hilda and Sir Flinders Petrie. So you had some comments or some pottery to share with us today, George? We always seem to do this.
Of course. Let's see. I think maybe you want to add it. Tell El Yehuda. He identified that unique pottery, which we dubbed Tell El Yehuda ware. That was his identification. I believe it's 15th dynasty Egypt, which puts it into the Hyksos period. Unfortunately, we don't have one of these pieces here, but they're easy to identify, and we could pull one off the web later.
Put a picture up.
All right. But he's known as an Egyptologist. So briefly, we'll just grab some Egypt stuff real quick as weapons. People always like weapons. We've done this before. A duckbill axe. This is go back as far as a 19th century BC. And then we have another type of, I see the different names for this. I like to call it the epsilon axe because it looks like the Greek
letter epsilon, yeah.
Letter epsilon, yes.
Yeah.
And then the Ushaptis. These are little Ushaptis, and these date from the 26th dynasty, late Pharaonic period, to the Hellenistic period, where we got a faience cup. Faience is the material that gives it that blue color, and then you can see the higher. Now, we talked about time sequence, and then you had a slide of lamps. So we can go to your slide of lamps if you want to bring it back up again. So we have a shell-shaped lamp. This is Iron Age 2.
Yep.
Now, some lamps, there's different types of these shell-shaped lamps. You can see it looks like a bowl. There you go. That looks like is that Iron Age? It looks like an early Iron Age. Now flip it over. Does it have a base?
No, round
look
base.
At that. Very good. It's earlier. It could be Iron Age 1. This is Iron Age 2. Iron Age 1. You can see where they introduced in the Iron Age 2 period the flat bases. So there you go. That's another technique on very similar lamps, how we identify them from different periods.
And this is where
you got soot marks on the front of it means it's been burned in antiquity.
Yep. And I didn't burn it. I've just got a wick that's burnt that I used from another oil lamp to put it in just to show everybody where the wick would sit and how they use them. So, yeah.
So these were spun on a wheel, kind of like making a bowl. And then once it was about leather hard, then they would pinch one corner of it to be the spout, or the place to hold the wick. And the rest of it would be the edge of the bowl. And it was the rim was slightly bent into what do you call this? Everted? An everted rim that's coming out?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good enough. And this is where you can hold it. You can hold it by the base, but this keeps it from rocking. You think for over 1,000 years they had a round base and it would rock like this, like the one you got. And then somebody has an epiphany, possibly, and they say, "Hey, we need to put a flat base on this, right? So it can stay on the table and not rock."
Yeah. Well,
But some
what
now we can identify the periods by whether it has a round base or not. But also, some archaeologists suggest, I'm going to say suggest, that we can identify the location, whether northern or southern, by how deep the base is. Now, it's been a while since I got into a book on lamps, which we have one right here. But I think the thicker the base, it comes from the northern. I got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. Okay. So anyway,
true.
the thicker the base, I think it's from up north. The thinner, the narrower the base, it comes from south. So they can, some say you can identify where the lamp is from. So we have a time period and also a possible location. Now, that's Iron Age. Oh, very good. Go ahead with that one.
Then we have these little tiny oil lamps, similar pinch, but they're tiny. This one has a flat base. Now the rounded base ones, where you would keep those, of course, is you wouldn't have your sitting on a table rocking and rolling. What you would do is you'd create a little bit of a spot on your floor in the dirt, and it would sit down in the dirt. And they would do the same thing with their jars that had those rounded bottoms in them. They'd dig a hole, and they would put them down in the hole. It would also keep the things cool, the food and
Right.
products that you'd have inside of them. So, but the flat bases were for flat surfaces, obviously. And here we have one that's small. Now, there's a bit of a story behind this. George, you want to tell the story about it?
Well, go ahead. I'm not
Two
quite
different
sure which.
periods.
The different periods.
Well,
What?
these were made in the early Bronze into the Iron Age, but then they were also reproduced in the Hasmonean period.
Okay. All right.
So if you find these, you could get stumped as to what period you're in.
Mhm.
So if all you would find is this would not necessarily tell you what period you're digging in.
That's
Is it
true.
in the Iron Age or is it in the Hasmonean period? So you would rely on other things you'd find, and going down in the stratigraphy, like Petrie describes,
Mhm.
you would tell that you're at a higher strata. You're probably in your Hasmonean period. If you're down in
Yeah.
lower, you're probably in your Iron Age, and you'd know that from other things you find, but you can't tell it just from this one piece of pottery. And
Right.
that's why that's
Okay.
kind of special. It's a bit like the Quakers that I had mentioned, that they
Right.
want to have they want to bring back the old stuff. They don't
Now we
like
have
the
two books on oil lamps. This one is from a Kedem series, so it's Kedem 8. Why 8? Because it's a series, and 8 is the book in the Kedem series that is an academic publication of oil lamps. Now, real briefly, I had this page marked if it didn't fade away on me here. Now, I know you can't see this, but anyway, right here it labels the time period. It says Hellenistic, so the Greek period. And as we look, we can see over here your pinch lamp. So
right,
Hellenistic period would be around 300, whatever, to around 63, the early Roman period. So these date to the 2nd century, which would put into it around 140, 150. So they were used also during the Hasmonean Maccabean period for those that would be familiar with the Jewish revolt, those early Jewish revolts
right.
during the Greek period, like Antiochus, was it Epiphanes?
If we wanted
So
to, and if we wanted to get into some really, really early pottery, we have some Greek. I have a sample of some of the Greek pottery here, and this is
right.
this is beautifully painted in the black and the yellow style, the white and red, and but this would date to around, I think I think this one's around 1,000 BC, something like that. It's pretty early,
Mhm.
but anyway, that's pottery. You generally don't find too much of that in Israel.
Right. Now, to validate what you're saying, David, about it being found in different places, different locations, different times, Here's my same book, Ketamate, similar lamps, pinched lamps. And look what it says. I don't know if you can see it. North African lamps. There you
Yes,
go.
yeah.
Okay.
And then you
Now,
get in the Byzantine period,
right.
and we have some
So we got the Iron Age lamps that
menorah.
are kind of like wheel made. And then we get into lamps like you're saying, like the Herodian lamps. I'm just going to say during the Roman period. And then you got the Byzantine lamps.
Yep.
Now, notice now this is Jewish. Okay, I'm going to just say Jewish, all right? Because they had the commandment, no graven images. So they would be by the law of the Torah, no graven images on their lamps. So they're very plain. We call these Herodian lamps, not that they were made by Herod or his sons or grandsons. That's the time period, all right? So first century AD BC. And then we have, you found one of these, your wife gave it to you, was for, a fragment of one.
Yep.
And this is a Byzantine lamp that says, in the light of Christ shines for all.
Right.
Yep. Some say this is a menorah right here. Others say it's a palm branch representing Jesus's triumphal entry. I've seen both of those.
Yeah.
Right. Now, these are made in a mold. Okay. Now we go to molds. Okay. Go ahead. Share your book there.
And there's also a good book on the oil lamps of the Holy Land from the Adler collection. Yeah, the Adler collection, and inside there's lots of really good illustrations of many different oil lamps. This is what we use as scholars. We can't identify exactly all of them. There's 170 some pages where there's usually about 12 oil lamps on every page. So we use these books to help us identify the different style oil lamps and periods. And this is from one collection alone, but all the way from the early bronze, all the way up to the Roman and Byzantine period.
Because I have 3 books on oil lamps, because being in the museums, we want to identify them correctly. So that's another book I have. And there's another one called the Warshaw Collection. I'm sure you can pick all these books up on Amazon.
Yeah.
Now here's a little lamp right here. If I flip it over, you can see a menorah.
Menorah, yeah.
Now, remember I showed you that the early Roman lamp right here, Roman period Herodian lamp, no graven image, and all of a sudden, this is after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So let's say during the 2nd century and afterwards, this is more like Byzantine period, that tradition left and they started having representations of the temple and the utensils.
Yeah.
Okay, so things change, folks. And sometimes when the pottery, the lamps change in size and shape. Also, what we see on the lamp can be an identification too that they didn't do this in the first century AD BC, but later on they did. Why? Because the temple was destroyed. You had the first Jewish revolt, then you had the Bar Kokhba revolt, and that kind of changed things. So
now I'm gonna show you something else we haven't shown before. Question is, how do they get the oil in the lamp?
well, yeah, of course, a lamp
filler.
A lamp filler.
Flat bottom, and then
is that authentic?
No, this is a reproduction.
Yeah, but it looks good.
Yeah,
I like
and then
that
you
a lot.
just you dip it in your pot, and get your oil, your olive oil in it, and then you can just pour it in those little holes.
Yeah.
This is late period, probably time of the Roman period, but you see that's how they get that oil in those little, because you got to remember, you've got a hot flame in there, you've got it gets pretty warm. So
okay, I got one more to share because we're talking about Petrie. I got this in a frame and I got some glare, and I apologize for that. But it's just some scarabs, some different size scarabs. Now, these would have been worn as jewelry, or maybe they could have a seal, a hieroglyph on the reverse side. So on one side, it looks like a beetle. On the other side, the reverse side, it had the hieroglyphs, probably a position of government, maybe the individual's name, or it could just be a selection of colorful hieroglyphs. And then on my left side right here, you'll see now this is cool right here. This is a scarab mold. So this is where they would pour the faience in and make the mold itself. So anyway, that gives people an idea how they made the scarabs. And of course, scarabs, they're used at the excavations because they might have a name of a pharaoh on it that might help identify the site along with the pottery. Oh, there you go. That's a nice idea of a scarab, a faience scarab.
Yep. With the
Okay, here's another one, another design.
yeah.
Now flip
Here's
it. This
another
one,
one.
this has the back of it. Looks like the back of nothing on it. Yeah, there goes another one. Yeah, very good.
And
Very
then
pretty.
on the back,
Well, that one fades out. Maybe I have to take a picture of it and show
there's
everybody.
hieroglyphs on the back.
Yeah, now I could see them there for a second. Yep.
Little hieroglyphs
Now
on the
let me
back.
tell you something. As a curator, we got to identify because there's all kinds of scarabs, and people are getting better and better about faking. Matter of fact, those are probably not authentic, but they're good representations.
Yeah, these are bought in a museum, so they're reproductions.
Yeah. Now, one way that we can tell if a scarab is authentic or a fake is that when they put that hole through the center of it, where they would, like make an attachment for a ring or a necklace,
Yeah.
they would actually drill through one side and then drill through the other side. So usually the holes don't line up exactly. So you look at them into the light, and if the hole seems to vary a little bit, that's a good indication that it is authentic. And there's other things we look at too, whether hieroglyphs are readable or not. You probably see right through it.
Yeah.
You could probably see me through it. I'll even wave.
Well, I know this is not authentic because I bought it in the gift shop.
Yeah. I think if you unwrap it, it's got some chocolate in there too. So
Yeah, just a little Egyptian mouth
that's a
mint.
good representation. That's
Yeah,
nice.
they're guys. I use them, for school, but anyway, gives you an idea of the size of them. So,
Right.
but they help with our dating because that's how we can correlate the time period in the Egyptian chronology with the pottery, and then transfer that over into to Israel.
And then anyway, this is when I went to Israel with Ann Davis, and she had her agenda and I had mine. My agenda was going to be in Jerusalem because I read in a BAR that there were two archaeologists. One was Dr. Strange, that's his last name, James Strange, and the other one was actually a Catholic priest, Bargel Pixner. And they were looking for the Essene Gate. Now, during the time period of Jesus, the Essenes, which was another sect of Judaism at the time, they're the ones that identified with the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. So anyway, they did have a portion of Jerusalem where they lived because they lived separately from everybody else. Basically, it was a male-oriented society. It doesn't mean that there weren't any women there, but I was looking for that excavation because I wanted to see the Essene Gate that they uncovered. Because I had this idea that when Jesus went into Jerusalem during the Passover, that one of his disciples said, "Okay, this place is packed. Where are we going to stay?" And Jesus said, "You're going to see a man carrying a water pot." That's unusual in a Near Eastern culture because that's a woman's job. Think of all the Bible patriarchs. How many met their wives at a well? All right. Now, maybe the reason why a man is carrying a water pot because he's coming from an all-male community, hence the Essenes. All right. So anyway, I was looking for the location of this excavation because I was thinking if I could find the threshold of where it enters into the Essene quarter, that'd be a nice possibility that maybe this is where Jesus went with his disciples to the upper room. And
Okay.
if I could just walk across there a little bit, I could be actually walking across possibly 2,000 years ago where Jesus and his disciples actually entered in. Talking about people go to Israel to walk where Jesus walked. You can't get any closer than that. That was my theory. And I had a hard time finding it. And I left Ann Davis at the Zion Gate, and I walked over to the location of the traditional location of the upper room and the tomb of David. And it's traditional. I kept on walking where there's a field, and there's a field that has an excavation, and they uncovered a very large mikvah. Now, remember what happened in the upper room where Jesus washes everybody's feet because he says, once you are clean, only your feet need to be clean. Could it be that they all bathed in a mikveh before entering into the city of the Essenes? Because we know they were very ritually conscious about that idea of ritual bathing. Because how many mikvahs are found at Qumran? Quite
Yeah,
a few.
a
Mikvah.
mikvah, a mikvah
Yeah.
for the listening audience, if they're not familiar, is a Jewish cleansing pool used just for the purpose of cleansing. So it's a very special kind of bathing pool.
Thought I was close because I was going from some very vague directions off of BAR, Biblical Archaeological Review, who mentioned it in an article that was like a paragraph or two. That was it. All right. And the reason for that is because they didn't really want tourists there. I didn't know that at the time. So I was walking back and forth, back and forth. And this very tall gentleman, I'm only 5'8", and he's looking down at me. He goes, sir, why are you so upset? And I go, oh, I said, you know what? I'm not upset. I'm just kind of frustrated because I'm looking for, because the Essene Quarter, the Essene Gate that was excavated by Bargel Pixner. And I'm talking like, and I got like, is this guy a tourist? And who is he asking me this question? And he looks down at me and he goes, oh, I can show you. I go, what? Really? So anyway, I said, well, if you could show me, then, I'll do it. That's why I came here. This was my thing for coming to Israel with Ann, so I could find this. And so anyway, this one's kind of good, though. People are going to like this. So anyway, so we went, past the traditional location of the upper room in David, and then we went past the mikveh that was in the field. Then we kind of went through a little ravine, up and over it, just a little tiny brook. And then we came to that cemetery that you're talking about, the Presbyterian cemetery. And there's a fence there. Now, at that time, I'm 5'8", but I was 210 pounds. And he hops over that fence. He's a younger guy, tall. That helps. And young. That helps. And he goes over it. I try to go over it because I really, really wanted to see this. And really, I didn't know if he was for real or I'm going to go into the cemetery and get my booty kicked and robbed. That was a possibility, too. So I jump over the fence, and when I jump over, my pants get caught in those little spikes that are on the fence, and I'm sitting there dangling, like the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz. And the guy sitting there looking at me, he goes, "You need to come down. You need to come because we're not supposed to be in there." He goes, "You need to come down." I said, "I can't." So I was going like this, and finally my pants rip, and I fall to the ground. Great. So we were walking. He goes, "Hey," he goes, "Listen, everybody's your brother, right? In that culture, They said, "Listen, my brother, would you like to see the tomb of Sir Flinders Petrie?" I go, "Wow, yeah, really?" And they showed me the site that you're talking about. And I thought that was awesomely cool. So then I told him the story about how his head was for posterity and sent to the British Museum at first. They lost it for years, and then it finally turns up again. Maybe you can show the audience a picture of that.
Yeah, I had a picture of that. The story goes apparently that they had a paper label on the jar, and to put this in context, they have hundreds of these brains in jars they've been studying. So it's not. It was a bit like losing a needle in a haystack when the label fell off, and they couldn't identify which brain it was that the label came off of. So even to this day, they don't know exactly which brain is Flinders Petrie. So he's lost in the science archive somewhere.
We'll find a picture because I believe they detached his whole head. His head is in a jar.
Yeah.
But let me continue because of time's sake.
That's what they were doing. I have hundreds of these. Hundreds of these heads.
Well, it's hard to tell who's who after so many decades floating in a jar. We tend to all look alike.
Formaldehyde.
Yeah. So anyway, we're not done. This was just a side venture, right? So I was looking for the Essene Gate. That was, and I agreed. I said, if you can show me the Essene Gate, I will give you 100 shekels. That means I had money on me, and that means number two, I'm definitely going to get my ass kicked. That was stupid for me for saying that before moving forward. So anyway, he leads me to the excavation of the Essene Gate, just like in the picture in BAR. I said, thank you. I said, like, who are you? Nobody knows where this is at because it's only, it's not that well known anyway. So I said, how in the world did you know about the Essene Gate excavated by Bargel Pixner and Dr. Strange? He unzips his jacket and pulls out an Israeli tour guide.
Yeah.
I said, why didn't you show me that to begin with? Because I thought I was just going to get my booty kicked out here and left. I'd be lying here by the Essene Gate.
So did you give him the 100 shekels?
I gave him like 150 shekels because I thought, man, and I got some pictures and it was really worthwhile for me. But you know what he said? Now, understand that he's Jewish, so you can't think that he would think along these lines. He said, well, why would you want me to show you this Essene Gate? Because it's not a well-known excavation. It's not a large excavation. And nobody takes care of it because it's in a cemetery of all things and it's badly eroded. All right. And I said, well, I'm thinking like, and I told him the story I told you. It's possible, I think, that Jesus might have walked across this along with his 12 disciples. And many Christians millions of Christians come to Jerusalem to walk in the path of Jesus, like the Via Dolorosa, which is actually probably 20 feet above the Roman period. But anyway, he looks at me and he says, you know what? He said, I should add this into my tour guide list. Nobody does that. Everybody will be mine.
And as an archaeologist,
I could help.
That's our story for today on Sir Flinders, and from an archaeological perspective. So
Right.
thanks
What a
everybody for being with us.
And his wife, Hilda.
Oh, Hilda, yes.
Yeah, I know
honor of
you
my
always
mom.
hear about Petrie, but
Yeah, in honor of my mom,
there you go. In honor of David's mom, Hilda.
Hilda, yeah.
Sir Flinders Petrie and his wife Petrie. Some wonderful, wonderful discoveries today, and with your presentation of the Petries and their involvement in archaeology and Egyptology, and also in early because of excavation in Palestine, Tel El Hesi. Also, we're happy to be able to share artifacts from the Museum of Archaeology and Biblical History in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Once again, thanks. And sponsored by Bible Interact. Now, David, you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, thanks everybody for chiming in and having a watch. I think we're up to what, 219,000.
Yeah, we were talking earlier, and
followers.
the phone went ding, and I looked, and we went to 219,000 about 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, so we're climbing, and thanks very much everybody for viewing our podcasts, and like and subscribe and ring the bell.
Everybody have a great day. Remember to like, that helps our algorithms completely, and subscribe so we can see you again and share these rare artifacts with you. Have a great day.